So it's been a while since the last Subcontrabassoon project video. Now, I don't want to turn what I hope will be an exciting video into a long list of excuses, so I'll just say that the first half of 2017 was very busy for me. Juggling 5 different regional orchestras, a new university adjunct teaching position, private lessons, and preparing a contrabassoon duet recital with Sue Nigro for the International Double Reed Society convention last month. But that's not the main reason for the lack of videos, because not a day goes by that I'm not working on or at least brainstorming about the project. The main reason is that what I've been working on for the past several months simply wouldn't make for very interesting videos. But I've gotten to a point where I can share that progress, hopefully, without putting you all to sleep. Now, a little history of the project. The original design, what I'm now calling the Mark 0, that has appeared in all previous videos, was finished in the fall of 2014. In the summer of 2015, I did a complete recalculation of the bore and tone hole dimensions. These recalculated dimensions are the basis for the new Mark II design that I'll be showing off in this video. Now, this gave me enough information to get started on the body joints, but it wasn't a complete design, lacking keywork and certain structural elements. So, during these past several months, I've been completing it. Now, this is exciting for 2 reasons. First, now that the keywork for the Mark II prototype is finalized, I will be able to machine each body joint's post holes and tone holes at the same time, reducing inaccuracy. And secondly, there were several aspects of the Mark 0 design that were quite rudimentary, and being able to start over from scratch with the Mark II produced a design that I am personally much happier with. The change that's likely the most obvious between the Mark II and the Mark 0 is that the Mark II is noticeably shorter. Excluding the end pin, the body of the Mark 0 would have been about 199 centimeters tall, or 6'6", while the Mark II will be about 193 centimeters, or about 6'4". The reasons for this change in length are a little bit technical, so I've split that part into a separate video. If you stick around until the end of this video, you'll find a link. Now let's take a look at the bocal. The Mark 0 bocal would have been significantly longer than a contrabassoon bocal, and contrabassoon bocals are difficult enough to make considering how long and relatively narrow they are. So with the shorter Mark II, I took the opportunity to shorten the bocal quite a bit. Subcontrabassoon bocal, at least one designed to play at A440, will still be a little bit longer than a contrabassoon bocal, but because of how much length change is required to change the pitch of an instrument this large, if I'd made it any shorter, then a bocal for A442 or even A444 would be inconveniently short. Next, at the other extreme end of the instrument, we have the bell. The Mark 0 had a metal contrabassoon style bell, and there are advantages to a metal bell. It's significantly lighter, and it's easier to get a flare at the very end if that's determined to be beneficial. However, metal bells are significantly more difficult to manufacture, or at least significantly more difficult to get set up to manufacture. In fact, all contrabassoons I know of do not have specially made contrabassoon bells. Instead, they purchase and modify alto saxophone bells. I did look into repurposing a saxophone bell for the Mark II, but even a low A barisax bell would be slightly narrower than I need. So on the Mark II, at least on the prototype, I've changed to a bassoon-style bell. This will be a bit heavier, but it'll be no more difficult to manufacture than the other body joints. When I recalculated the bore, I also needed to recalculate the tone holes, both their positions and their sizes. On the Mark 0, I used the contrabassoon tone hole sizes relative to the bore as a template for the tone hole sizes on the subcontrabassoon. And while that's still generally true on the Mark II, I did deviate more readily when it made sense. The most obvious place where you can see this is on the C-sharp tone hole. On the Mark 0, the C-sharp tone hole is small and it has a riser, similar to on contrabassoon. Now on contrabassoon, this is for purely practical reasons, so that tone hole can be placed on the wing joint rather than needing to be placed on the small bend right above it. But on the subcontrabassoon, there's no such limitation, so in the Mark II, I relocated and resized that tone hole to better match some of the other standing closed tone holes, like the E-flat tone hole and the B-flat tone hole. The other tone hole that's significantly repositioned is the tone hole for low B natural, which is closed by the low B-flat key. On the Mark 0, this tone hole would have been located rather inconveniently on the large bell bend. Fortunately, with the change of bore length, it became necessary to move this tone hole to the first bell joint. The next few changes concern how the instrument is actually held together structurally. The Mark 0 was essentially held together by the bends themselves, with only a handful of braces and brackets between adjacent joints to strengthen them. On reconsideration, I felt that this approach would be inadequate and honestly a little bit dangerous. So for the Mark II, I've added two unified frames at the top and the bottom of the instrument. So instead of the body joints being inserted into the bends with normal woodwind socket joints, as was the case on the Mark 0, on the Mark II, the bends will be attached directly to the frames, setting on top of the top frame and suspended below the bottom frame. The body joints are then inserted into this frame and bend assembly. Finally, both frames are connected by an aluminum support column. This way, if for whatever reason a tenon becomes loose, there's not a risk of the whole instrument falling to pieces, because the column will still hold the two frames together. If we look at the end pin, on the Mark 0, you can see that the entire weight of the instrument was being supported by these two bends on the bottom of the instrument. Whereas on the Mark II, the end pin is connected directly to this bottom frame. I should probably add that there will almost certainly be additional bracing on this bottom frame and end pin assembly to prevent flexing. Now a handful of large-scale keywork changes. Here, on the low B key, which closes the low C tone hole, you can see how the long hinges have been divided in two, or in one extreme case, three separate sections. This will decrease the amount of slop that's introduced into the keywork with routine temperature fluctuations. You can also see the key cradles that have been added to the longer hinges to help guard against keys being flexed out of position during routine handling. And finally, the double pad cup arms that I've used for the larger pad cups to increase the rigidity of this connection. Now, there are literally hundreds of tiny changes to the keywork design between the Mark 0 and the Mark II, so I'm not going to go into every one in depth. But one group of keys was completely relocated in the change to the Mark II. On the Mark Zero, the left-hand pinky keys for low E flat, low C sharp, and low A were attached to the second bass joint. This made it a little bit easier to work out the keywork on the second wing joint, but it did make for some awkward ergonomics. So in the Mark II, I reworked all of the keywork on the wing joints so that I could bring these 3 keys to the second wing joint along with the rest of the left-hand keywork. On both the Mark Zero and the Mark II, all of the harmonic vents operated by the octave keys are on the ascending tube. On the Mark Zero, there would have been 3 octave vents. 2 vents open in tandem by the lower octave key, and 1 opened by the upper octave key. So 3 vents total, which is more or less what exists on a traditional contrabassoon. But I had concerns that that system would be inadequate for the subcontrabassoon. So on the Mark II, I'm planning on a 4-vent system, with each octave key operating 2 vents in tandem. But having said that, I fully expect that the exact positioning and possibly even number of octave vents on the subcontrabassoon prototype will be subject to trial and error. Now let's move on from comparisons between the Mark Zero to the Mark II and talk about some things that are new on the Mark II. Just like the Mark Zero, on the Mark II prototype, I am intending to keep the keywork relatively Spartan. So all of the basic keywork required for full chromatic range without some of the extra alternate keys that we may be used to on bassoon. However, I didn't want to design the keywork in a way that would make it impossible to add these extra keys, or at least without completely reworking all the keywork. So here's a view of a hypothetical subcontrabassoon that includes these extra keys. So you can see how these keys could be added with relatively small changes to the existing keywork. So front F sharp, front B flat, an alternate upper octave touch, a thumb E flat key, and finally a thumb A flat. Now there are 2 more keys that I'm still considering extra, but that I probably will add to the prototype because they involve the addition of a vent or tone hole. Here we have a unique to subcontrabassoon key that functions as a 3rd harmonic vent, somewhat similarly to the bassoon's high A key, which, if successful, would give the subcontrabassoon a range up to a high B flat or high C, depending on the exact positioning of the vent. One of the advantages of the length of the subcontrabassoon is that such a vent can be placed in a position that allows it to function over a larger span of notes, unlike the bassoon's high A key, which is only really works for 2 notes. Because of bassoon vent, analogous to what I've done here for subcontrabassoon, would be on the bocal. And finally, we have an E to F sharp trill key. This would be for the left hand and would function the same as E to F sharp trill key on bassoon or contrabassoon, if you're lucky enough to have one on contrabassoon. Now if we zoom out to the overall structure of the instrument, we can see a new manner of removing the bell section. I believe it'll be worthwhile to be able to remove this bell section so that the bell section could be in a separate case. The idea being that it would be easier to manage 2 large cases rather than 1 gargantuan case. I've also shown here a hypothetical C bell that could replace the bell section while limiting the range of the instrument to low C. But that's purely hypothetical at this point, and I'm not sure that it would be worth the trouble to make one. For one thing, the bell is so short relative to the overall length of the instrument that it's probably not going to make enough of an intonation difference to matter, and also because it could needlessly confuse the issue of the instrument's range. And finally, there were a few things that were always going to be part of a Mark Zero prototype, but that I hadn't modeled. Small, mostly aesthetic things like the springs, the corks, and the felts. It probably wasn't necessary to model these for the Mark II either, but it was a fun CAD challenge. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you're interested in the bonus video, going into more technical detail about some of the bore changes between the Mark Zero and the Mark II, you can find that here. If you'd like to stay up to date on the project, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the YouTube channel. As always, you can visit subcontrabassoon.com, and I hope you have a great day.